The Savanna has always been a place where stories are written in blood, where the wind carries secrets, and where the night decides who will live until morning. On one such night, two young girls were left to die under the endless African sky. Their father, Jumbi, had once been a man of laughter and pride, but grief had hollowed him out. The death of his wife carved his heart into pieces, and instead of healing, he filled the emptiness with anger. That anger turned into something darker, hatred. And in his brokenness, he placed the blame where it never belonged, on his own daughters. One evening, when the shadows were long and the crickets sang their steady song, Jumbi watched his twin girls fall asleep. Their breathing was soft, innocent, trusting. With rough hands, he tied ropes around their fragile bodies, his face stone cold, refusing to look them in the eyes. Without a word, he carried them into the heart of the Savanna. The land stretched wide and unforgiving, filled with predators that never showed mercy. He tethered them to a crooked old tree, its bark twisted like the soul of the man leaving them there. Standing over them, he spoke in a flat, empty voice. "I return you to the earth." Then he turned his back, believing. He had ended both his pain and his tragedy, but the earth was listening, and the earth was not finished. Far away, in a lonely hut hidden among roots and shadows, an old healer stirred. People whispered that he could hear what others could not, that when the wind moved, it carried voices only he could understand. That night, he felt the ground tremble, faintly beneath his feet. He pressed his ear to the soil and heard something no ordinary man could. Two cries woven together, soft but stubborn, the cries of souls refusing to surrender. Back in the Savanna, the danger was already closing in. Hyenas, patient and hungry, had begun to circle the girls. The night seemed to breathe with their laughter, a sound more chilling than the storm. The Savanna itself felt as if it were holding its breath, waiting to see what fate would decide. This is the story of the night the Savanna nearly devoured two children before dawn. Amina was the first to awaken. The cool morning breeze brushed her face, sharp and biting, like a warning. She opened her eyes slowly, and at first, the world around her made no sense. She tried to move, but her wrists screamed in pain. The ropes cut against her skin, biting deep, soaked with sap that made them hard as bone. Confused, she turned her head and saw her sister beside her, still unconscious, her body bound as tightly as her own. Amina's heart pounded like a war drum. Her mouth was dry, her tongue heavy, and when she tried to scream, nothing came out. It felt as though fear itself had stolen her voice. Beside her, Hale Lima, the younger twin, mumbled softly in her sleep. She whispered their mother's name, a dream-born plea that made the moment all the more unbearable. When she woke, the realization hit her too. Her feet were tied, her body trapped. A faint cry escaped her lips, a sound of pure helplessness. The night was cruel. The moon cast a pale light over the land, painting everything in a lifeless glow, as though the world had bled dry. Around them stretched nothing but dry grass, twisted shrubs, and silence too heavy for children to bear. Amina clenched her fists, fighting against the ropes, but each tug only scraped her skin raw. The smell of damp earth mixed with sweat, and fear hung in the air like a suffocating blanket. Then, crack. A sharp sound snapped through the silence, a branch breaking somewhere nearby. Both girls froze. Hale Lima's body shivered uncontrollably. Then came the howls, long, haunting calls, rising in the distance, one after another. Amina knew the sound. Hyenas. She remembered the nights back in the village when the dogs barked restlessly at the edges of the dark. But here, there were no dogs, no walls, no protection. Only the two of them, tied and helpless, waiting for what the night might bring. A rabbit dashed across the clearing, its eyes glowing under the moonlight, before vanishing into the grass. Even prey knew where safety lay, but the twins had nowhere to run. Fear rose like smoke in their chests. Amina shifted her body, forcing herself between her sister and the open darkness. She knew she was small, powerless, but she could at least be a shield of flesh and bone. If something came, it would come for her first. Love didn't need words between the sisters. It lived in gestures, in sacrifices too small for the world to notice, but too big to be forgotten. Since birth, they had survived by leaning on one another. Now, with death so close, Amina made her choice without hesitation. Rustling grew louder in the brush. Eyes appeared, first two, then four, then more. Gleaming yellow orbs flickered, watching, studying. One pair stepped forward, brighter, unblinking, a hyena. It stayed back for now, patient, testing, waiting for weakness. Hyenas did not rush. They knew death moved slowly, and they were willing to wait. Amina swallowed hard, straining against the ropes again. The tree they were tied to was old and gnarled, its branches twisted like the arms of a ghost. It had likely watched many lives, end beneath its shadow. The wind picked up, carrying with it a foul odor, rot, decay, abandonment. Despair itself seemed to take shape in the air around them. Hail Lima began to weep softly. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Why, Amina? What did we do?" Amina had no answer. Her throat tightened with the same question, one she had carried silently since the day their father's love turned to shadows. Why had he turned from them? Why had he chosen hatred? The hyena backed away into the brush, but not in fear. It was waiting, as patient as the night itself. Hours passed in strange, dragging slowness. Time no longer moved in minutes, but in heartbeats and shallow breaths. Each sound became a threat, each whisper of grass a sentence of doom. Amina fought to keep her eyes open, knowing that in this place, sleep could be the same as death. And then, something unexpected broke the silence. A voice, soft at first but steady, singing an old song that drifted with the wind. It wasn't the cry of an animal or the growl of a predator. It was human. Both girls lifted their heads. Amina strained to listen, and Hail Lima's tears stopped. For a moment, the hyena vanished into the brush, as though the sound itself commanded it to leave. The savanna stilled. The footsteps followed, bare, steady, pressing the earth like they belonged to it, like the ground knew them. In the forgotten edges of the village lived a man called Molinu, though most had stopped saying his name. No one knew his true age, only that his eyes had seen more than most men could dream of. He walked the land barefoot, knew the taste of every healing leaf, and carried in his mouth songs older than memory. They said he spoke to the wind, and the wind listened. When he sang, birds grew silent. When he whispered, the air shifted. He was the kind of man time did not take. It only respected. Years ago, he had left the village, choosing the company of roots, herbs, and silence. He appeared only when pain grew too heavy for ordinary remedies. When children fell ill for no reason, when mothers could not feed their babies, or when people swore they saw the shadow of death lingering at their doors. Other than that, he was a ghost of the savanna, living alone among secrets. That night, he had wandered farther than usual. Something unsettled him since noon, a heaviness in the air, a wrongness that refused to fade. He had tried to ignore it, to continue gathering herbs. But when he reached the great twisted fig tree where he always left an offering for his ancestors, the earth shivered under his hands. A chill rose through him. He looked at the sky and saw nothing unusual. No stars falling, no storms breaking. But within his chest, something pulsed. Something cried. Instead of turning east, where he always found his medicines, he turned west, toward land many called cursed. People said the soil there held old spells, but Molinu feared no curse. He had carried the weight of the world's pain before. He followed the invisible call, step after step, his wooden staff striking the ground like a drumbeat. Finally he stopped, knelt, and pressed his ear against the earth. He heard it, the sound of children crying, not loud but muffled, as though swallowed by the soil itself. It was the kind of crying that begged, that refused to give in. His eyes, lit with fire. This was no accident. Some pains were not random. They were placed. He whispered an ancient prayer for permission and followed the tracks. At first the prints were faint, fading into the dust, but then clearer, heavy, dragging, human. Not one set, but several. Signs of someone carrying weight, signs of force. And then came the smell. Not of flesh or bone, but of something older, deeper, the stench of abandonment. The moon shifted, spilling light through the branches, and there in the clearing he saw them. Two small bodies tied to a tree like forgotten offerings. For a heartbeat he thought they were spirits. But when he drew closer, he felt the warmth of life. Pain, yes, but also life. Molinu's eyes filled with quiet grief. He knelt as though before an altar and touched the forehead of the younger child. Then he looked to the elder, the one who had been fighting, shielding, refusing to surrender. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask who. He only murmured, "They're still warm. The earth rejects this death." When a man like Molinu says the earth refuses, it means life still has work to do. The moonlight was pale, almost blue, when the old healer bent low before the girls. His knees touched the soil with reverence. His movements carried no fear, no haste, only purpose. He looked into Amina's eyes as though he had known her soul long before this moment. Closing his own eyes, he began to chant, a song older than memory itself. His voice rose and fell in the rhythm of the ancestors, a melody only the eldest still remembered. Amina tried to scream, but her throat wouldn't cooperate. She looked at that strange man in his loose tunic and bare feet, and for a second thought he was a spirit. But when he extended his hand and gently touched Hail Lima's face, she knew he was no spirit. He was someone who still remembered how to care. She no need to fear. "Little root," he said, softly, like singing to a sleeping child. "You are still warm. The earth didn't want you." Amina felt the weight of those words, even without understanding them fully. It was as if he were telling her that there was still a chance that death hadn't claimed them yet, because something else awaited them. With precise movements, Molly Moo took a small bone knife from his leather pouch. The blade wasn't large, but it was sharp. He raised it to the moonlight and murmured something in the ancient tongue. "Let it not cut the soul, only the rope that binds." Amina held her breath, thinking he might hurt them. But the blade slid through the ropes as if it knew the way. Without injury, without haste, without failure, the ropes fell to the ground like dead serpents. Helma coughed, leaning back against the trunk, her wrists still marked in red. Amina, even free, didn't move. She looked at the old man as if seeing a miracle in human form. "My name is Malali Moo," he said, "and I am not your owner. I only heard what the earth screamed." The wind blew strongly at that moment, shifting direction. The tree leaves began to dance, and even the silence seemed to quiet itself to hear what would come next. He stood slowly, leaning on his carved wooden staff. With a piece of rough cloth, he wiped the girls' faces. Then he took a handful of dry leaves and blew a fine powder over them from a small goat horn he carried. "It will ease the fear for a moment," and then, without asking anything, he extended his hand to Amina. She hesitated, but her eyes met his, and in them she saw something she hadn't seen in a long time. Truth, not promises nor pity, but truth. Amina took his hand. Malamu was light, despite his age. His steps made no sound. When he lifted Hail Lima in his arms, she rested her head on his shoulder as if she already knew him from before she was born. They followed a path that didn't exist, not to ordinary eyes between shrubs, rocks, and shadows. Mimu guided them with steady steps. The savanna that once seemed like a graveyard, now bent to let them pass. The wind blew behind them like a push. The sky seemed to watch over them with each step. Felt the pain lesson not in her wrists, but in her heart. For the first time since their mother died, someone walked beside them with the intention to protect, not to harm. She didn't know where they were going. She didn't ask. She only knew that beside the old man with eyes like embers and a voice like earth, there was more chance of life than there was beside their own father. Moimu stopped at a point where the forest seemed denser. He touched a tree with an open palm, murmured something, and a fresh root smell filled the air. Then he turned to Amina and said, "From here no one who wishes harm can follow. The earth takes care. The river gods. You will rest." And so they continued. The night enveloped them, but didn't swallow them. It was as if the darkness respected this unlikely triad there, Oldman, who listened to the earth, and the two girls whom death had not yet claimed. At the far end of the savanna, far from the village that pretended not to know, the story began to change, not by force, but by faith, not by revenge, but by a breath of care, coming from a place no one else had thought to seek. Mlem's feet barely made a sound on the damp earth as he led the girls down a path not marked on any map. It was as if each curve of the undergrowth recognized the old man and parted in respect. The surrounding forest seemed to listen, silent too, the mute cry still flowing from Amina's eyes. She walked with scratched feet and a heart beating in rhythm with fear and gratitude. Behind the old man, Hale Lima slept heavily, still cradled by exhaustion, and the breath of the leaves he had scattered across her face. The night was thick, almost solid, but Malamus' eyes could see beyond the darkness. He didn't guide by sight, but by omens. The stars, hidden behind thick clouds, seemed to bow to the mission of that old man. No one really knew where he came from. They only knew that his steps knew the way, even when the feet of the world had long forgotten it. After much walking, they reached the edge of a silent river. It wasn't wide, but its dark water held ancient stories. Around it, twisted trees cast shadows like long fingers trying to touch those who dared to approach. There, an old wooden bridge, crooked, corroded by time, connected to banks that the people said no longer communicated. On the other side, it was said, began the forgotten land where no one lived, where the sun seemed not to rise fully, and where those who disappeared were given up for dead. Moyamu stopped before the bridge. He looked up at the moon covered by clouds. Then, at Amina, "What we do now has no easy return," he said, his voice firm but sweet. "Those who cross this path without faith, they get lost. But you were left to die. On the other side, maybe you will live." Amina didn't say anything. She just nodded. It was no longer fear that guided her, but the small hope that sprouted in the gesture of that man who promised nothing, only acted carefully. They crossed the bridge. Each plank creaked as if protesting against the weight of Thestories passing over it. The wind blew stronger, pushing from behind, like a nudge from destiny. When they reached the other shore, everything seemed to change. The air was colder, the trees taller, and there was a strange smell in the air, not of rot, but of ancientness, as if time walked sideways there, not forward. Malamu continued through the underbrush until they reached a circular clearing. In the center, a hut made of clay and vines surrounded by stones arranged in a spiral shape. Around it, small clay pots with ashes, dried roots hanging from branches, and a dark wooden bench with knife marks. This was where he lived. With the care of a father, carrying his firstborn, he laid her Lima on a mat of fresh straw. He took a gourd of water from a nearby pot and began to wash her face, singing a chant so low it seemed more like thought than voice. Amina sat on the other side of the hut, curled up with her knees hugged to her chest. She was free from the rope, but not from the memory. Her wrists still ached, and more than that, she ached for what they had never had. A father's love that night. No one slept, as one sleeps. They slept as if extinguished, the body tired, the soul wounded. The old man kept watch over them as one keeps watch over an ancient secret. Every now and then he placed herbs to burn. The ashes rose with the scent of time, spreading through the hut, a sense that something sacred was unfolding. For 3 days, Amina and Hale lie slept. Sometimes they murmured names. Sometimes they cried without tears. Molly Moo remained silent. He only went out to gather roots, prepare infusions, and pray with ashes over the hut's entrance. His chants didn't ask for healing. They asked for clarity. They didn't beg for a miracle, but for strength to continue. On the night of the 3rd day, Amina opened her eyes and saw Moali Moo sitting at the door, looking out into the dark of the forest as if reading a book. She didn't say anything. She simply sat up, took the bowl of water beside her, and drank. The taste was bitter, but it went down like comfort. Hale Lima still slept, but her breathing was light now. The old man then turned, smiled faintly, and said, "The roots have answered." Death passed by here, but did not stay in that forgotten clearing, in that forgotten corner of the world. Destiny began to rewrite itself, not in haste, nor with fanfare, but with the wisdom of one who knows that the greatest transformations do not shout, they whisper. On the 3rd day after the girls disappeared, when it was already believed that the silence had swallowed them forever, a woman woke up sweating, her heart racing and her eyes brimming with tears. Her name was Empolia. She always wore her hair, tied with a red ribbon, and had the gaze of someone who had seen grief pass through the door many times, but never through the heart. She was a midwife, seamstress, healer, and a mother. But more than that, she was one of those women who feel when something in the world is out of place. That early morning, Ambalia had a dream. She dreamed that 2 girls were crying among bones, a thin, continuous cry, as if the souls of the children were trying to speak. In the dream, she walked through dry brush and saw a child's ribbon caught on a crooked branch swaying in the wind. And then a voice said, "Don't close your eyes, Embelia. The mother still waits." She woke up with that phrase burning inside her. She didn't tell anyone. She simply put on her oldest cloth, tied the red ribbon in her hair, and left while the sun had yet to conquer the fog. She carried nothing but a water flask and a handful of dry corn. The path she followed wasn't familiar, but her feet knew where to go. Sometimes the soul pulls you where Thor cannot reach, and Balia walked for hours. The brush was tall. Thorns scratched her skin, but she didn't stop. At one point she paused to drink water, and it was then that she saw the branch. There it was, exactly as in the dream, crooked, dry, solitary, and caught on it a piece of ribbon with a child's design, light blue, with an embroidered heart, and Balia fell to her knees. She brought the ribbon to her face, smelled it, kissed it, and let the tears flow. "This is a sign, not a mistake," she murmured to herself. Then she stood up and kept going. She didn't know what she was searching for. She only knew she needed to tell. Someone had to hear. By the end of the day, she returned to the village. With the ribbon in her hands, she gathered the women and told them what she had dreamed, what she had seen, and what she had felt. She showed them the ribbon, as if it were a piece of the girls' souls. But the village fell silent. Some lowered their eyes. Others pretended not to listen. Until one of the men, a distant relative of Jumbi, murmured, "Better leave it alone. The father doesn't want questions. The father doesn't want questions." That phrase fell on the courtyard like a stone on a clay roof, and Himalaya understood. The village wasn't just made of people. It was made of fear. No one wanted to stir the pain that could still explode. No one wanted to challenge a man who had always been seen as a wall. Jumbi, even in silence, still imposed a type of power that time had not erased. But Imbalia was not one to stay quiet. She took the ribbon, tied it on her arm, and walked through the middle of the square. "If no one goes to look, I'll pray. And if you don't want to pray with me, I'll pray alone." Because two daughters were torn from life, and not even the brush deserves this injustice. The village children ran after her, not understanding, but feeling. Some old folks looked through their windows, and the mothers one by one became uneasy because they knew what it was to lose. They knew what it was to sense pain from afar. That night Ambalia lit a candle in front of her house. She sat on the threshold, the ribbon on her arm, her gaze fixed in the dark, and while Thesicata sang, she repeated an old verse. "If the mother calls, the child listens, even if death covers the ears." On the other side of the river, in a clearing where time walked slowly, Hail Lima opened her eyes. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just whispered, "Mommy!" And at that exact moment, Moi Mu, who had been grinding leaves with his hands, looked at the flickering fire in the center of the hut and murmured, "The memory has awoken. Now the spirit walks again." The bonfire burned low that night. The flame flickered like a heart-bidding farewell, casting long shadows on the walls of the clay hut. The smell of burning leaves mixed with the scent of corn porridge that Moali Mu prepared with patience. Hailing slept with her head resting on her sister's lap, her hair spread out like roots at rest. Amina, in silence, watched the fire, but her eyes seemed to see far beyond the flame. There, in that forgotten place, the two girls had found something they never knew existed. Permanence Mu Ali Mu watched them. He didn't ask, didn't press. He just felt he knew there were pains that couldn't be healed with questions. There were silences that needed to be respected as sanctuaries. But that night, he knew it was time to speak. Not to teach, but to undress himself, too. He sat beside Amina. For a moment, they simply stayed in silence. The kind of silence that embraces, that doesn't disturb, that invites the soul to rest. Then, with a voice softer than the wind, he began, "When I was young, my mother hid me. I was the child no one could know existed. She'd leave me at the back between the pots and the buckets of water. When someone came, she'd say, 'Be quiet. Don't make a sound. You mustn't be seen.'" Amina slowly turned her face. She had never heard the old man speak of himself. Mimu continued, looking at the fire. "I grew up thinking my name was silence. I had no bed. I slept on a sack mat. My food came after everyone else ate. They never hit me. But neglect is a kind of beating that leaves no mark on the body, only on the soul." He sighed, and his eyes missed it. It wasn't sadness that could be seen there. It was an old memory, a remembrance that bled slowly. "One day when I was 12, I ran away. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just left. I crossed the river, walked for days, and ended up here. The land welcomed me. The forest taught me and loneliness. She took me in like an older sister." Amina rested her head on his shoulder, not out of pity, but out of recognition. She so young already knew what it was to carry a guilt that never belonged to her. "You understand now," he said. "Why I didn't ask in anything. Why I didn't say poor things. Because I know I too was left where no one wanted to look." At that moment, Hail Lima slowly woke up. Her eyes were still heavy. But when she saw her sister leaning on the old man, she smiled, a shy smile. Like a flower blooming after a drought, Malimu looked at her and said, "The memory of your mother is strong in you. It was she who called in the dream." Amina then asked, her voice trembling, "Does she know where we are?" "No," the old man replied, "but she feels it. Her mother's love crosses rivers, walls, and distances. One day she will come, but not now. Now it is time to rebuild." He stood up, took a gourd with dark liquid, and handed it to Amina. "This is a potion to forget fear, not memories because they shape who we are, but fear. Fear paralyzes, and those who carry too much fear cannot heal anyone." She drank hesitantly. The taste was bitter. But for some reason, it also brought comfort, like the embrace she had never had. Now Moalimu said, "You will learn not just how to make potions, but how to look at yourselves without guilt, to know that being born is not a mistake, that to exist is not a crime, that to love, even when it hurts, is still what saves us." Hail Lima stretched her arms out, asking to be held. Moimu took her gently and laid her on the leather mat. "The first healing," he said, "best when we stop blaming ourselves for being born." Amina looked at her sister sleeping, and for the first time, she felt something within her that was different from fear. It was small, but it grew like a seed in wet soil. Maybe it was courage, maybe it was faith, or maybe just the feeling that they were no longer alone. That night, the hut did not sleep. It pulsed like a new heart learning to beat. In the village of Mu, time moved in circles. The days seemed to repeat the same sounds: the clinking of pots in the middle of the morning, the pounding of pestles at dusk, the impatient roosters at dawn. But there was one house that no longer made noise: Jumbi's house. A sturdy clay building with dark wooden windows and doors always closed. There the silence was heavier than the midday heat. After the disappearance of his daughters, Jumbi followed his routine as if nothing had changed. He carried water, chopped firewood, washed his face in the same bucket. But something inside him had cracked. The rigidity of his body began to yield. First in small gestures, a stumble while lifting the bucket, a hand that didn't respond well to the axe, a fatigue that arrived before midday. The pain started in his back, a weight that wouldn't pass, as if he were carrying sacks of stone on his shoulders. Then came the fevers. They weren't constant, but when they came, they burned him. He sweated, trembled, lost track of time. His legs softened. The bed, once only for sleeping, now became a constant refuge. He began to avoid leaving the house. His face, once firm and cold, now hid in the shadows. The village noticed, but didn't speak. The respect for Jumbi was old, and the fear was too. No one dared knock on his door, ask or offer help. The few who passed in front of the house merely whispered, "Something's wrong with him." But no one said it out loud. It was as if the truth was forbidden to enter there. Emblea, who dreamed of the girls, was the first to realize that this wasn't a common illness. She would say in a low voice while sewing in her yard, "There are things the body feels when the soul commits, a crime that even time cannot forgive." One day, Jumbi called a healer from the neighboring village. He paid in advance, but the man, upon seeing the house, stopped at the gate. He said he felt the energy too low, that there was something there that even the miracle leaf cannot resolve. He didn't enter. He turned his back and left the payment on the beaten earth. Others were called. None agreed to help. Some didn't even respond. Rumors began to spread. They said the dogs no longer barked in front of the house, that the birds avoided landing on the roof, that the well in the yard had dried up, that the ants once abundant in the kitchen corner had vanished in a single night dot. And among the whispers, one phrase began to repeat: "What he threw to the earth now returns through the ground." Jumbi tried to fight against his own body, but the pain was relentless. It wasn't pain of bone or flesh. It was pain that came from regret and spread like slow poison. Sometimes at night, he would call the names of his daughters in his sleep. He murmured in Mina as if speaking to his spirit. On other nights, he would wake up shouting, drenched in sweat, saying that a woman with white eyes appeared in the corner of his room. "She holds 2 children by the hand," he would say, "and looks at me as if she knows everything." Each day the illness took up more space, and so did the loneliness. The neighbors began to avoid passing by. Children were forbidden to play nearby. They said the house now belonged to those who had no name. Some spoke of punishment, others of a curse. But there were those who whispered, "It's the world's justice." He took the daughters from the land of the living. Now the land pulls him back. In the house where silence had once reigned with disdain, now lived the noise of guilt. Jumbi, lying in the hammock, felt his body weigh more than ever. His eyes wouldn't close. His mouth no longer asked for food. He didn't say it out loud, but inside, he begged, "If there is still time, if there is still a chance, let them forgive me, or at least let someone hear me." But no one listened, and time, which always moves slowly for those who suffer now, seemed to run. On the other side of the river, Amina dreamed of fire. Time passed differently in the clearing of the old Moi Lemou. There the days did not run as in the village. They were not marked by bells, by hours, or by hurry. They were guided by the leaves that fell, by the songs of the birds, by the breath of the wind, and by the silence of the roots. With each new dawn, Amina and Hale Lima learned something that books could not teach. They learned to live without fear. They learned to look at themselves without guilt. They learned above all to heal, and not just others, but themselves. Did not teach as a teacher. He showed through gestures, stories, patience. Each morning he took the girls to the stone circle behind the hut. There, with hands in the earth, he explained the names of the leaves, the uses of the barks, the secrets of the roots. "This one is for a fever that doesn't go down," he would say, handing them a bitter-smelling plant. "But if you use too much, it becomes poison. Everything that heals can kill if it's badly dosed." The girls listened in silence, but their eyes shone, like eyes that had returned to hunger for knowledge. Hale Lima, still small, was enchanted by the colors, the smells, the way nature spoke without opening its mouth. Amina, on the other hand, learned with intensity. Each leaf was like an answer, each root a memory transformed into strength. She did not speak aloud, but within her grew a desire not to be just someone who survived. She wanted to be a bridge. She wanted to be healing, but not everything was lightness. At night, Amina began to dream. Dreams that burned. She dreamed of the house in the village, the doorframe, the clay stove, the hammock where her father slept. And in the dream, everything was on fire. The walls trembled, objects melted, and a thick smoke covered everything. But there was no scream, no despair, just the fire and her standing, watching without fear. Upon waking, sweat soaked her neck, but, contrary to what she imagined, she did not feel terror. She felt purpose. Molly Moo noticed. One afternoon, while they were gathering banana leaves for smoking, he stopped and said, "You've been walking through fire in your dreams. Your eyes have changed." Amina didn't answer. She simply looked at him with the certainty of someone who was no longer a child. "It's a sign that the healing is ready to come from you," he said. "But first, you must know why this fire still burns. Is it a memory? Is it anger? Is it a calling?" Amina lowered her face. She murmured, "I want to go back, Molly." Moo nodded slowly. "Going back may be necessary, but not for vengeance. Vengeance burns those who carry it. If you go back, let it be to break the curse. Let it be to cleanse, not to hurt." Amina understood, and for the first time spoke with a firm voice. "I want to go back, but I want to carry water. I want to carry leaves. I want to carry what cleanses, because there are things rotting and no one has had the courage to open the door." Hale Lima heard and her eyes filled. "Well, go together." The girl said, "You are my arm. I am your root." In the following days, preparations began. Mimu helped them gather the right leaves, dry the roots, prepare the infusions. He made seed necklaces to protect the girls. He wrote with charcoal an ancient symbol on the inside of their tunics. This mark is to remind you that you no longer return as you left. Now you are daughters of healing. And those who carry healing do not carry hatred. Before they left, the three sat around the fire. Moyu burned tamarind leaves and sprinkled ash over the girls' feet. Then he held their hands and said, "You were left to die." But life refused. Now return not as victims, but as answers. Amin did not cry. Hail Lima did not either. Pain was no longer new, and fear they had learned to recognize and embrace, but no longer obey. As the sky turned red like blood mixed with clay, the two girls departed, their backs straight, their eyes firm, their hands filled with leaves, water, and destiny. And from the top of the hut, Moalimu whispered to the wind, "May they, burning of the past, not burn what remains of love." The sky over the village of Mugu dawned with a color noon could name. It wasn't the usual blue, nor the gray of rain, or the red of drought. It was an uncertain mix, as if the day hesitated to be born. The chickens didn't crow at the same time. The dogs seemed restless, walking back and forth as if they sensed old footsteps approaching. And the elders, those who always wake up first, sat on their porches with serious faces, as if preparing to hear a long-awaited secret revealed. It was in this setting that two figures appeared at the entrance of the village. Amina led the way, her feet steady, her hands holding a small basket covered with a white cloth. Beside her, Hail Lima carried a bundle of leaves and necklaces made of red seeds. Their hair was neatly braided, their eyes fixed ahead. No words, no hesitation. Anyone who looked would think they were the daughters of some ancient healer coming from another village. No one at first glance saw them as the girls left to die in the savannah. People slowly began to come out of their houses, drawn by a restlessness they couldn't explain. They watched, they whispered, "Who are they? Where did they come from? Are they just passing through?" But no answers came, only looks. Until in the middle of the central square, a blind old woman who always sat under the shade of the cashew tree stood up. Her name was Jalira. She'd lost her sight more than 15 years ago, but had never lost the gift of seeing with her soul. She was respected by all, not for what she could see, but for what she could feel. Upon hearing the murmurs of the people and the sound of approaching footsteps, she moved forward as if she knew. "Come closer," she said, her voice raspy but firm. Amina stopped before her. Hail Lima, with a contained sigh, took the old woman's hand and guided her to her sister. Jalira touched Amina's face with trembling fingers filled with restrained emotion. Then she took her hand and held it for a time that seemed too long for those watching. Silence. No sound other than the light breeze moving the leaves of the cashew tree. Then Jalira whispered, "This girl." She was born with the mother on her back. The square fell silent. Some women placed their hands on their chests. An old man dropped his pipe. Someone whispered, "It can't be, but it was." Jalira, with tears in her blind eyes, confirmed, "It's them." The name of the girls spread through the village like fire on dry straw. Amina, Hail Lima. They've returned. They are alive. Those who had whispered now ran to see up close. Some cried, others just stared, their faces full of guilt, astonishment, or shame. Across the square, Jumbi heard the murmur from the hammock where he lay. He tried to stand, his legs failed him, but still he dragged himself to the door. His body sweated, his face pale as dry cotton. When he opened the door, he saw the crowd gathered, and in the center, the two figures he never thought he'd see again. Amina's eyes met his, and for a moment, time stopped. There was no scream, no accusation, just the presence of those who had survived abandonment. And in that presence was the full weight of what he had done, not just to them, but to himself. Jumbi took a step, stumbled, and fell. He collapsed before the door as if his body had finally acknowledged the soul in ruin. Amina didn't move. Hail Lima covered her mouth with her hand, unsure whether to run or stay firm. But Jalera, still by their side, said, "Now the village must be silent and listen." Because on that day, the past didn't just return. It presented itself with seed necklaces, healing hands, and eyes that didn't ask for vengeance, but demanded the truth. And the truth was that fate, no matter how late, always returns to collect. The entire village seemed suspended that day. The children stopped running in the fields. The women fell silent on their porches. The men put away their tools before noon. The sun was high, but the shadows seemed to cover everything. It was as if time itself held its breath, waiting for what would come next. Amina and Hail Lima remained, silent since their father had fainted. They didn't run to him, nor did they turn their faces. Their response wasn't in gestures or words. It was in stillness, a stillness so firm that not even the loudest screams could break it. They helped carry him inside the house with the help of the neighbors. They laid him in the hammock where he used to sleep and forget about life. And there, he stayed without saying a word, his eyes wide open as if trapped between two worlds. The next morning, before the first rooster crowed, Amina left in house where she and her sister had been welcomed. She wore a simple tunicune adorn, but in her eyes was the same firmness of those who returned not to collect, but to cleanse what has been too stained for too long. Hail Lima walked behind her carrying a wicker basket. Inside were leaves gathered along the riverbank, lemon tree, basil, gine, and a handful of dried roots wrapped in cotton. The two walked straight to the old well in the village, the same well where their mother used to fetch water before she died, the same well where Jumbi washed, his face before learning to despise Amina. Lowered the bucket. The water came clear but cold. She washed her hands, she washed her face. Then she filled a picture and covered it with the white cloth she had carried since Malamu's house. Hail Lima carefully began to lay the leaves on a mat. The women of the village, who had been watching from a distance, began to approach. One by one, they didn't speak, but they felt that this wasn't just a bath. It was an act. They arrived at their father's house in silence. The door was ajar. The interior smelled of mildew, dry medicine, and abandonment. The walls bore stains of time. The floor had marks of someone who hadn't swept in days. The hammock swayed slowly with Jumbia's body, who now barely blinked. He was alive, but he seemed like a piece of shadow. Amina entered first. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for approval, because what she had come to do didn't depend on permission. It was justice. Not the kind that punishes, but the kind that restores. Hail Lima scattered the leaves on the floor, forming a small path from the door to the hammock. Amina, with the picture in hand, began to sprinkle water on the door frame, then on the windows, then in the corners of the room. The smell of the leaves spread like a bomb. It was fresh, bitter, and sweet, all at once, a scent that spoke of new beginnings. When she reached the hammock, Hermina stopped. She looked at her father. He didn't move, but a tear rolled down the corner of his eye. Silent. No noise, like all the things he'd never been able to say. She took a handful of water, dipped the leaves in it, and pressed them against his chest. His shirt soaked, his chest trembled. Helma approached and poured the last portion over their father's feet. Jumba cried, not as a man accustomed to pain, but as a child who finally understands what they've lost, and with a voice nearly extinguished, he said, "Forgive me." "If there's still time," Amina didn't answer. Hail Lima covered her eyes with her hand. They knew that forgiveness didn't need to be spoken at that moment. The gesture had already been greater than any words. As they left the house, they found the village in silence, but it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of reverence. Mbalia was the first to kneel. Beside the doorframe, she ran her hand over where the water had dripped and whispered. Today, the house began to breathe again. Galera, the blind woman, appeared shortly after she touched the door and said, "There was death here. Now there's memory, and memory, when washed with forgiveness, becomes an altar. On that day no one worked, no one fought, no one pretended not to see. On that day, the village watched two girls wash the past with their own hands, and the land, for the first time in a long time, seemed to finally be at peace. Jumbi did not die, though his body was worn by neglect and the weight of his own making. It found the strength to resist. But something inside him completely broke that morning. It wasn't his bones or his blood. It was what held his pride, his rigidity, the wall he had built over the years. After the daughter's cleansing, after the water poured with intention and the healing that came without expectation, he never screamed again. He never walked with his shoulders high as though above others. He never looked anyone in the eye without lowering his own first. He stayed silent for days. Sometimes he murmured disconnected phrases. Other times he stared at the ceiling as though he saw the face of the wife he lost in childbirth. He began to eat slowly. He accepted tea from the neighbors. He listened without interrupting. He didn't apologize again, but he washed his own clothes. He swept the yard with trembling hands. And one day, without anyone asking, he planted 2 lemon trees at the back of the yard. They say that when he planted them, he whispered, "May they never need a bitter root to forget." The daughters never returned to live with him, not out of resentment, but because life was different now. Amina and Hale Lima became respected healers, first in their own village, then in neighboring ones. The wisdom learned from Wiu wasn't displayed like a trophy, but shared like a blessing. They treated mothers, children, the elderly. They knew how to listen. They knew when to speak and when to remain silent. Their presence brought peace, and slowly the people began to see them as more than survivors. They were a source. They were the root. They were what remained of pain and became medicine. Amina grew with the gaze of someone who had walked through the depths of fear and returned with light. Hale Lima, even at a young age, carried a serenity that silenced even the most impatient. Together they were a living reminder that destiny can be cruel, but it can also be just. Old Molly Moo. He passed away on a dawn when the sky was too clear to be ordinary. He left nobody, no coffin, only a basket of roots at the door of his hut, and a note written with charcoal on a dry banana leaf. "Now it is up to you." The villagers said they saw a bird land on the roof before the hut collapsed with the wind. Others claimed that on full moon nights they hear a song coming from the forest. A low, deep song like the one he used to murmur when cutting roots. And where it all began, that crooked tree in the middle of the savanna, the village built an altar, not large, just a circle of stones with cloths tied to the branches, gourds with water, and fresh leaves always replaced. It's there that mothers pray for their children, that orphans leave toys, that those who've lost someone go to converse. In silence, they say that on nights of strong wind. When the world falls quiet and the branches dance, first a soft cry can be heard like that of a child. Then a song of healing, a lament that becomes a prayer, a wound that becomes a flower. Because destiny, even when dressed in tragedy, never forgets the just. And justice for those who wait with an open heart always comes, sometimes in the hands of an old man, sometimes in the silence of 2 daughters, but it always comes. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our